Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to part 2 of the tutorial series where we're building a bookmarking app, a social bookmarking app where people can save links and other people can see your saved links just to see what you're reading and what you find interesting on the internet. So here's where we are from session 1, and I'm going to fire up my Mongo database and the web server and make sure everything still works. Okay, so here are the endpoints that we had from last time, and let's go ahead and continue building these out. So one thing I want to do is for the bookmark, I want to have these fields populated automatically. So in other words, I don't want the user to have fill in all these fields. It's too much for the user to do. You want to make it as easy as possible. So what we want to do is remove those input fields from the HTML, and we have only the URL, and that's it. And what should happen is once the user submits the URL, we're going to have a scraper, a web scraper, fetch the URL's contents, and then grab the key pieces of information, the title, the description, the image, and the URL itself. And we will use that result to enter into the database rather than whatever the user types. So that's called scraping. We're going to use a library called Cheerio, which is a pretty good Node npm library. So go ahead and install that. Okay, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up another route whose only job will be to scrape. So let's call it scrape. And inside the scrape route, okay, just like before, we're setting up a very simple response, and that's it. One key difference, though, is that we're not using the params here. There's no parameter here. We're going to use the query, which is a query string that you can append to a URL to add more details about the request. So it'll make more sense once we actually see it. So let's go back to our app.js and hook up that new route. So here we import it, and then here we determine the path through which to use it. I didn't need to do that. There we go. Okay. So now here, if we go back and start the web server, we should be able to make a request to that route. And did not work. So let's see. Okay, so I had a typo here. If you caught that, I had rec twice. Make sure you have rec, then res, then next. Okay, that's request, response, and then next. So, okay, great. So now we have that route properly connected. It's usually a good idea just to make sure nothing else broke. So, okay, looks good. Now what we want to do is in here, we want to import Cheerio. However, we need another library to actually make the follow-up request to the URL. So for example, when we pass in a URL here, we now have to make a follow-up HTTP request to that URL to gain its contents so that Cheerio can do its job of going through the contents and then parsing through it. So what we need here is another module to do that, and I'm going to use what's called Superagent, which makes HTTP requests. So let's import Superagent. Okay, and then let's import it here. And then let's make sure that there is a URL first. And if not, then we want to return an error message. I should have done this the first time, so I'm just being thorough here. Okay. Good. Okay, so now here, let's use the Superagent module to make a request to that URL. So it's going to be a GET request to the URL. Set. Now we want to pass in the query params, which is null, and then set the headers. Error response. Okay, there is the error block from Superagent. So whatever goes wrong there, we're returning an error message. And then here, let's see how I want to do this. Let's send back res.body. Okay, let's try it. So we need a website to scrape from. So let's see, let's go with Yahoo. Okay. Okay, let's see here. Okay, looks like I had the wrong payload key. So the payload key is actually text, not body. So excuse me, I first had this, we actually want this. So my apologies. So now here, if you look closely, we're actually looking at the Yahoo homepage, but from my server. You see that? So the entire Yahoo site is being loaded via my server. So if I try something else like ESPN.com, I now see ESPN from our localhost server. So our server is basically acting as a conduit to the website that we're requesting. So now that we have all that, we can use that to parse out the key pieces of information, the title, the description, any primary images. So if I go to a site like Medium, and let's say we have this website right here, and I want to query that. Here it is, and everything looks good. I now want to go into the HTML. This is all bundled. Let's use the regular one. Okay. So we want to grab certain tags that look like this. You see where it says title and then content. So here is the title inside of a tag, a meta tag with a OG colon title property. We can also check for a description one as well as an image one. And here it is. So this is all pretty easy to parse because it's very well standardized. So what that means is almost every website that has shareable content will have these tags in this format. That's because this is sort of a standard way of sharing sharing data on the internet, mostly because of Facebook. So when you share stuff on Facebook, the content that you see is determined by these tags. So we can just use those tags to grab the metadata and insert them into our database. So let's do that. So we're going to use the Cheerio web scraper to do that. Okay, so this is one area where I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to use the web scraper from a previous project. Okay, so right here I encourage you to pause the video and copy this as you see it, but I'll explain real quick what's going on. So here on line 33, listing which tags I want. So the ones that I pointed out a few minutes ago are also listed right here. And then I'm creating an empty object for metadata. That's gonna be where we place the values of these respective tags. And then we use Cheerio, and we want to actually load the HTML right here. And Cheerio will then take the HTML contents and place it in a variable like this, which is basically a jQuery handler. And the Cheerio APIs are basically very much like jQuery. And it'll go through all the meta tags. So if you look closely here, this tag right here is called a meta tag, and its property is OG colon title. So what we're telling Cheerio to do is find all the meta tags, and for each one, if it has a property, if a property exists, And if that property is one of these, then take the value from here and put it inside the metadata object underneath that key, but removing the OG prefix because we don't really want that. So it'll basically populate the metadata object with the OG title, description, and image, and whatever else you want. If you go through the HTML and find more properties that you want, as long as they're in meta tags in this case. So this is a very simple scraping module. It's not too sophisticated, but it's good because it's pretty standard in that these tags exist in a large percentage of websites. Like 75%, 80%. Basically, anything that wants to be shared is going to contain these tags, because if you want something to be shared, you want to do it so that Facebook can share it. So that's good. It makes everything more standard. And then, last but not least, we just return the that object to the client side. So now here, if I run the scraper again, I'm not going to see all this anymore. I should just see JSON. And there it is. So now we have the title, the image, a very brief description, and the actual URL, the original URL. So this is good. This scraper worked. So now we can use that here to populate the metadata for every entry a user enters into a bookmark. Excuse me, I don't know if you can hear that outside. They're doing some construction outside, so if you can hear all that hammering and buzzing, I apologize. So what we want to do is go to the controller. Let's see how I'm going to do this. I think the better way is to create a utility module. So let's create a directory called utils. Let's cd into that. Let's create a utility called scraper. And then inside and also before I forget, let's create an index. Okay, inside the index we want to import the scraper. Okay, and inside the scraper we want to import Cheerio and Superagent. Let's just do Cheerio for now. And scrape. HTML. Props. Okay. And then here, is where we want to use the scraper. We want to create this functionality in the scraper right here, and then return the metadata. And we want to pass in the properties as a parameter, as an argument. Okay, let's try that. So now here we go back here and we import the scraper from utils. see. Let's go capital S here. Okay. Okay, so now we're trying to use the function from the scraper to run all that scraping functionality. So let's try that. Oh, got an error. Scraper, scrape. Okay, so let's see what we're doing here. Oh, I forgot the properties. Silly, silly, silly. And it's saying scrape is not a function either, so that could be another problem. Okay, let's see here. All right, yeah, I think I see what I did. So let me just test this real quick. Says URL is not defined, so let's see. Let's leave that off for now. Okay, and then utils. Okay, looks good. So yeah, I was making a silly mistake. So in here, we have the scraper exported in the utilities index file. So we have to reference it from the utility index as a property like that. So that should take care of that. I think there is a property called OG URL. Let's find out. Perfect. So right here. Excellent. Okay, so now we have a more generic scraper module that will simply scrape using one function. So what we want to do now is perform this set of operations inside the bookmark controller. So we basically want to do this exact thing in the bookmark controller. So we're going to need Superagent and the utility library. And then here, we want to do that scraping functionality in the create. So basically when a user creates a bookmark, he sends in a set of parameters, which is only going to be a URL, and then we want to scrape that URL, and then we want to um, grab the pieces that we need. So I'm going to actually put that inside the promise. Makes more sense actually. So let's do that right here. Okay, so here's the thinking. So when we create a new bookmark, we want to query the URL that the user entered and then grab the metadata via scraping and use that metadata as the input values for the bookmark. That will determine the contents of the bookmark. So let's see if this works. I'm going to use the same bookmark as before. I'll use this one instead. This looks pretty interesting. Okay, that's enough. All right, so beautiful. So you see what we did? We entered one URL and it found all the necessary information that we need to create the entire bookmark. And that's it. The only thing we left out is the profile. We'll take care of that later. But the scraping engine worked. So now we can get rid of this. And test the endpoint. Cool. So now we have this bookmark entered from just a pure URL, and that's it. Maybe worth trying another just to make sure. Here we go. Cool, very good. So here we just entered the URL. Then we got the corresponding title right here. There it is. Got a description, which isn't that much. Here's the image. There's the image. And that's it. And here's the original URL. So everything looks good. I agree with this, by the way. As a former native mobile iOS developer, this is definitely true. Okay. Oops. So now our bookmark controller is a little bit more unique to the bookmark resource. So these controllers are meant to perform logic that's unique to the resource. So right now, until this video is done, or until this point I should say, there wasn't too many differences. The profile and the bookmark resources basically operated in the same exact fashion. But that's changing now. The bookmark is starting to do its own thing. So that's why we have controllers, so that we don't have to write all sorts of conditional logic inside the API handler. So that's the idea behind that. So far so good. So again, I moved a little bit fast in this video. The idea is just to follow along and try to keep up with the code while I explain it. This is certainly not a beginner tutorial, so if you're a complete beginner, you're probably pretty lost by now. But if you've done some work in JavaScript before and you understand basic web development, maybe you've done some Ruby on Rails or Python Django, then a lot of this should seem pretty comfortable to you actually. And so yeah, just make sure you can follow along, and if you need to, pause the video and make sure your code is the same as mine. So excuse me, in the next video, we're going to further expand upon the controller for the profile now. So you may recall the profile has a password input, and then if I make an API request to that profile, you can see the password right here is just plain text. So we don't really want that. We want to encrypt that password. We want to hash it so that it's not human readable. And we're going to use an encryption library to do that. And that encryption will happen on the profile controller side. So that because the profile controller will require that functionality. So before I wrap up this video, one last thing I'm going to do is go back to my app.js and remove this scraping endpoint. The reason being is that we only used it for testing purposes, and the testing was successful. We got it to work, so everything is fine without it. We can go without it. So we don't want to leave sort of a mess behind. We want to keep our code as efficient as possible. So let's see what else we can find to share. Let's try this guy right here. Oh, so this one didn't have it. So this is one thing that I wanted to point out. Some websites, they don't really have the necessary tags. So this website isn't very well optimized for sharing, at least on Facebook. Well, that's too bad. It's relatively new too. He just posted this. Let's try this. Well, we got the image, but not the title or the description. So as you can see, there's some room for improvement, and you might want to try this on your own. This guy used the Twitter tags. So this is a good exercise if you can try and use these Twitter tags instead, and to cover for other sharing scenarios. It's worth giving that a shot. So yeah, try that on your own. It's a good assignment, and if you get that working, kudos to you. Thanks, and stay tuned for the next video where we do password encryption for profiles.